Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It started as an Anglo-American diplomatic row over leaked messages, but now it's taken centre stage in the political fight between the rival camps in the Conservative leadership race. Britain's ambassador to Washington, Sir Kim Darroch, resigned this morning, saying he could not carry out his duties after President Trump's unprecedented attacks on him. But supporters of Jeremy Hunt say the top diplomat's decision was linked to frontrunner Boris Johnson's refusal to give him full support during last night's TV debate. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has the story, and his report does contain some flash photography.
Sir Kim Darroch, 42 years, a loyal public servant, the boy from the council estate who advised prime ministers, and until this morning, Her Majesty's ambassador to the United States. He resigned, he said, because his leaked remarks critical of Donald Trump had made it impossible for him to carry out his role. And at Westminster, there was anger and support in equal measure.
Sir Kim has given a lifetime of service to the United Kingdom, and we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. Good government depends on public servants being able to give full and frank advice.
I think the comments made about him are beyond unfair and wrong. I think he's given honourable and good service, and he should be thanked for it.
At last month's state visit, Mr. Trump and Sir Kim were on good terms. But his private description of an inept and dysfunctional White House prompted a wave of presidential insults and the announcement he would no longer deal with the ambassador.
I will keep him until he's due to retire, okay. And I think we'd like to know if you would.
Well, I'm not going to be so presumptuous as...
And after the man who might be our next Prime Minister refused to support our man in Washington last night, some Whitehall sources said Sir Kim decided he had to go.
Boris Johnson, a former Foreign Secretary, and he hopes to be the future Prime Minister, has basically thrown our top diplomat under the bus. And there are a lot of people here in the Commons who are very, very angry.
Allies of Mr. Johnson said this was a shabby attempt to politicise the resignation and that Sir Kim's position had become untenable before last night's debate.
He was a superb diplomat, and I worked with him for many years, and I think that whoever leaked his diptels really has done a grave disservice to our civil servants.
You said last night you weren't going to back him.
No, on the contrary. Well, my view is it's wrong to drag civil servants into the political arena. That's what I think.
Sir Kim's resignation has wrought a heavy blow on British diplomacy. Morale here at the Foreign Office is low, and the risk is that it leaves Britain looking like a leaky ship, buffeted by a foreign power, with its diplomats fearful in future of speaking truth to politicians who may not defend them if that truth were ever to leak. This afternoon, Foreign Office staff met to show solidarity with Sir Kim. Their boss told MPs it was unprecedented for the head of a friendly government not to cooperate with a British ambassador.
I have already been in touch with all the ambassadors this week, stressing that unvarnished, honest analysis is what we need, is what officials need in order to give the best possible advice to ministers so that their decisions can be as good and as evidence-based as possible.
The question now is who will be the next resident in the British Embassy in Washington, for he or she will have a big repair job to do. James Landale, BBC News.
Well, let's join Nick Bryant in Washington. Nick, Mr. Trump may have broken the diplomatic rules, but many will say he's got his way.
He tried to make Sir Kim's position here untenable, not just by ridiculing him on Twitter, but by blackballing him on Twitter. That Monday night tweet where he announced the administration would no longer do business with him. Diplomatic doors started shutting straight away. Sir Kim disinvited from a dinner that very evening where he was supposed to sit down and eat in a room with the president. And so we had this extraordinary situation, unprecedented in modern times, when the White House was going to be a no-go zone for the ambassador of America's closest ally. Without our access, ambassadors cannot do their job. Now, Donald Trump didn't have to use his famous catchphrase, "You're fired," but that was the message of his tweets. There was pushback from Theresa May, there was pushback from Jeremy Hunt, there wasn't pushback from Boris Johnson.
Nick, thank you very much. And Boris Johnson faces a backlash from another quarter too. This time, former Prime Minister Sir John Major has warned that he is ready to go to court to stop the next Conservative leader from suspending Parliament over Brexit. Mr Johnson has repeatedly refused to rule out such a move to ensure Britain leaves the EU by the end of October. This report from our Deputy Political Editor John Pena contains flash photography.
Democracy doesn't get more British than this. The Queen opens and closes Parliament. Holding the Prime Minister and government to account, that's MP's job.
My Lords, pray be seated.
But the man at the back, the blonde one, Boris Johnson, hinted he might suspend Parliament so MPs can't block a Brexit with no EU deal. Past PMs sometimes criticise successors, never like this.
The Queen's decision cannot be challenged in law. But the Prime Minister's advice to the Queen can, I believe, be challenged in law, and I, for one, would be prepared to go and seek judicial review to prevent Parliament being bypassed.
Sir John Major's lit a fire under the question who'll decide the shape of Brexit. Parliament is always suspended between sessions, but a former Prime Minister threatening to take a successor to court if he tries to shut the doors of this place to shut down opposition to a no-deal Brexit, extraordinary. His case? Abuse of the Constitution. Why elect MPs if a Prime Minister can send them home if they're in his way?
Post-politics career, Boris. Look up for us.
All too soon.
Boris Johnson, pulling pikes like the practice campaigner he is today, was having none of it.
I think the idea that now consecrating the decision to the judiciary is really very, very odd indeed. And what we want is for Parliament to take their responsibilities, get it done, as they promised that they would.
But this issue's much bigger than an argument in a pub or a row between politicians. It could draw the Queen in her palace into a messy political dispute, a legal battle over whether she should ever be advised to suspend Parliament and sideline elected politicians. The other candidate for PM has been clear. He wouldn't shut down opposition from MPs.
If you shut up Parliament because you don't agree with what it's doing, in a parliamentary democracy, that is an absolutely huge thing. And I think if you were to do that as part of the process of forcing through a no-deal Brexit, the social and democratic consequences would be unimaginable.
One expert can imagine judges deciding a legal challenge.
Well, it is a case that could go to court. The courts would have to decide, firstly, whether they would hear it substantively. That would take certainly days, possibly weeks, and nobody can say for certain how this case might turn out.
Like other possible crises, this one may never happen, but it is another doubt over Brexit that could affect all our futures, one that could take Britain and British politics somewhere wholly unexplored. John Pena, BBC News, Westminster.
One of Sir Kim Darroch's leaked dispatches warned that Donald Trump was thin-skinned. The past few days have not, in that respect, at least undermined the accuracy of his judgments. Reportedly, it was Boris Johnson's failure to back Britain's Washington ambassador in last night's televised leadership debate that was the last straw, although Mr Johnson's supporters say the ambassador's position had anyway become unsustainable. By resigning, Sir Kim clearly wanted to put an end to an extraordinary chapter in the so-called special relationship. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary.
As you say, the focus shifted a bit from the attacks that had been happening on Kim Darroch from President Trump today to the lack of support that Kim Darroch got in last night's leadership debate from Boris Johnson. There's pushback from supporters of Boris Johnson saying that there's no way that had anything to do with his departure. But I have been told by sources that, in fact, although the idea of leaving the job had been forming in Kim Darroch's mind already, it was Boris Johnson in the debate not giving support that clinched Kim Darroch's decision. Theresa May was lecturing slightly in the House of Commons today that people should be very careful about these constitutional niceties like the independence of civil servants, officials, diplomats. Some people will say that's pretty rich. There was a senior diplomat, Ivan Rogers, who left government service. I think most people suspect because of a leak from people very close to Theresa May. There is an expectation, maybe that's pushing it too far, a hope in bits of Whitehall tonight that Theresa May will seize this moment, this window, this 2 weeks that she's still in number 10, to put someone in place of Kim Darroch in Washington that maybe wouldn't be the person Boris Johnson would put there. We don't know whether she's going to be able to pull that off. Amongst grandees in foreign policy in this country, you sense they can't quite decide which they feel worse about tonight. The fact that Britain has been pushed around by America's leader in the last 24, 48 hours, or the fact that the man who looks like he could be going into number 10 in 2 weeks' time seemed instinctively not ready to defend a British diplomat under attack from a foreign leader.
The Fox News alert. The British ambassador to the United States, Kim Darroch, has resigned.
Sir Kim Darroch said the pressure on his family and the embassy was too much. Leaked emails criticising President Trump's administration prompted insults against him from the president and what looked like a ban on attending White House meetings. But Kim Darroch was also said to have been influenced by the lack of support from Boris Johnson in last night's Tory leadership contenders debate.
Go on, tell us if you'll keep the ambassador in Washington. Come on. I know, no one here is going to tell anyone. Just tell us the answer.
I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to
I'm
going to be in a position.
Do you believe that Sir Kim Darroch resigned because Boris Johnson failed to fully support him in your debate with him last night?
I defended him, and I think we all should.
This could be a post-politics career, Boris. Look up for us.
All too soon.
Boris Johnson, visiting a Wetherspoons pub in London this morning, was asked about failing to back the ambassador in last night's debate.
But you weren't going to back him. You said last night you weren't going to back him.
No, on the contrary. Well, my view is it's wrong to drag civil servants into the political arena. That's what I think.
What is clear is that Boris Johnson did not defend him. And I think that is spineless. I think it's a failure of leadership. I think he's basically thrown Kim Darroch under the bus for his own private ambition. And I deplore that.
Boris Johnson was asked about that today and said, no, I didn't say that. I didn't deny support to Kim Darroch last night. Does that tally with your viewing of the debate?
No, and I think his protests today are insincere guff.
If you're in that position in Washington, beleaguered, waiting for the next tweet from the president, what you're going to look for most of all is staunch support back home. And he had it from the Prime Minister, he had positive words from Jeremy Hunt, and the fact that there weren't those positive words in the debate last night must have been a factor.
It's a bit early in the day for us.
Well, I had quite a late night last night.
Boris Johnson responded to those attacks by phoning Sir Kim Darroch to express his sadness at his departure. Back at the Foreign Office, where a month ago President Trump gave his end-of-state visit press conference, a room was filling up with officials, called for a special briefing from the head of the Foreign Office to calm their nerves.
I think people are shaken by what has happened. There is a reason why I have asked to see all my colleagues at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The basis on which we have worked all our careers suddenly feels as though it is challenged.
In the front row for the pep talk, Sir Alan Duncan.
I can't imagine for a second that this will have improved Boris Johnson's stock in this building from the low point from which it was already starting.
Boris Johnson was accused of a different affront to the Constitution first thing this morning, when the former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, attacked the frontrunner in the Tory leadership campaign for refusing to rule out suspending Parliament if MPs were threatening to block a no-deal Brexit.
I, for one, would be prepared to go and seek judicial review to prevent Parliament being bypassed.
I think the idea that now consecrating the decision to the judiciary is really very, very odd indeed. And what we want is for Parliament to take their responsibilities, get it done.
And from the current Prime Minister, what sounded like a warning after Kim Darroch's resignation not to play fast and loose with the independence of the civil service.
And I hope the House will reflect on the importance of defending our values and principles, particularly when they are under pressure.
Some in Whitehall are hoping that Theresa May will quickly appoint a successor to Sir Kim Darroch, before her successor moves into number 10 in 2 weeks' time.
Gary Gibbon there. Well, how did the resignation go down in Washington, D.C.? Our correspondent Kieran Jenkins is at the White House for us. Kieran.
Well, a disastrous day for British diplomacy. Just another day for Donald Trump diplomacy. The White House wanted Sir Kim Darroch out, and they got it. Not so much of a special relationship yesterday morning when President Trump sent those humiliating tweets, or when he then froze out the UK ambassador, effectively making his position untenable. Now, the nearest we've had to a response today has come from the Vice President's Chief of Staff. He said that in light of the last few days, the ambassador's ability to be effective was probably limited. Well, whose fault is that, you might wonder? Now, tellingly, President Trump has already moved on. He's tweeting about other grievances this morning. But the UK, this relationship is too important. We can't move on. What does the next ambassador do here? Does he or she censor themselves, thinking that their communications might somehow get out? What does the next Prime Minister do here? If it's Boris Johnson, he's expected to dart over here to the White House for a meeting with President Trump. How much of a factor was that in his not giving Sir Kim his full backing yesterday, with an eye on the importance of a future trade deal after Brexit? And onto that trade deal, what does it tell us about that? The power balance in those talks. If the president can effectively dictate who isn't or is our ambassador, then where will he stop?
Kieran Jenkins, thanks very much. John?
Well, a little earlier I spoke to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, and I put it to her that the treatment of Sir Kim Darroch was becoming a national humiliation.
I think it's terrible, isn't it? It breaches so many rules. Why on earth should we be bowing down in front of this dreadful president? He doesn't like our ambassador now, so we have to change him. And you know what has really happened, and you know and I know, all the public know, it doesn't really matter what Theresa May says. What matters is what the next Prime Minister is going to say. When Trump was first elected, I remember saying to Boris Johnson, we have to be really concerned about this. Shouldn't we be challenging him on things like climate change, on the Iranian nuclear deal, all of these various things? And Boris Johnson would say to me, oh, Emily, you're just exaggerating. You don't really understand. You know, it's not that serious. You know, he'll be completely different. Well, he's not. And he needs to be stood up to. And if our ambassador tells the truth about the American president and the current regime, he certainly shouldn't be put into an embarrassing position whereby the next Prime Minister is not prepared to defend him, and so that he feels obliged to resign. It is disgraceful. Of course it's disgraceful, and it is a national humiliation.
The fact of the matter is that he simply could not go on doing his job, even if he wanted to.
Look, there have been leaks of cables before. These things happen at times, but frankly, we stand by our diplomats, and we have to say to the Foreign Service, you know, the people around the world who are serving our country, we stand with you. We will not just throw you under a bus in this way. It really is dreadful.
Politicians on both sides in the House have talked about special relationship, our best friends and the rest of it. The truth of the matter is they are when they want to be, and they aren't when they don't.
I don't think I really agree with you. I think that there is a great deal about America that we do have in common. I think that we have deep friendships with America. It's just that we have problems with this particular president, actually.
Relations between the President of the United States and Great Britain are the worst since Suez.
Well, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but it isn't just the president. You know, America is not just this current president. America is a vast nation of huge numbers of people, of all kinds of politicians and people around the president, and we work with them. We don't need to work with him. But I tell you what, we do not let him bully us. You know, I'm fed up with watching all this hand-holding and kowtowing. You know, it's not working. It doesn't work. So I've always said, when you're faced with a bully, you stand up to them.
In the meantime, Emily Thornberry, the Brexit issue has risen again, not least because Labour appear to have changed their position to some extent.
So we have clarified our position, I think. I think it is now perfectly clear that any deal or no deal that this government introduces, we will demand that there is another referendum, and we will be campaigning to remain. That's the position.
And is Labour a Remain party?
Well, we will be. I mean, that's what our position is, isn't it? Is that we campaign to remain.
But it hasn't been until now.
Well, I'm just telling you, our position is clear, and our position is that anything that this government puts forward, we are going to be demanding that there's a referendum and that Remain is on the ballot paper, and we are getting on the barricades for Remain.
And in the event of an election?
And in the event of election, we do what we always do, because we're a big old Democratic Party. We've got 500,000 members. We have a Clause 5 process, and we will need to work out what it is in our manifesto. I don't imagine, John, if you speak to anybody from any of the political parties and ask them what's in their next manifesto, they're not going to be able to tell you. You know, I want to be helpful here, but we can't really, because we have a democratic process, and also we don't know when the election's going to be.
Beyond the reality that actually Europe is an absolutely fundamental issue.
Of course it is.
In our democracy.
Of course it is. And the point is that as of now, my party is one whereby we get onto the barricades for Remain if there is a deal that this government brings back, and we say we will not allow that to go ahead without there being a referendum and without us, and we will be campaigning to Remain.
Emily Thornby there. Now from Labour to Tory. Earlier I spoke to Boris Johnson's supporter and former Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon. I asked him how big a national humiliation he thought this whole business has been for us.
Oh, it's obviously disappointing. The scale of this leak is going to make it very difficult in future for other ambassadors to report fairly and frankly if they know their stuff is going to be leaked. So, as Boris Johnson has said, we need to rapidly find out who did this and make sure that they're caught and punished.
Boris Johnson effectively hung Kim Darroch out to dry last night. He did nothing less than that by not supporting him.
No, that's nonsense. Sir Kim's position became extremely difficult when all this material was published on Sunday. He was then cut out of meetings with the American administration on the Monday. And then yesterday we had the president's tweet attacking him directly, attacking our Prime Minister directly. And it was then, of course, that Sir Kim's position became untenable.
Sir Kim has told a number of friends who've told quite a few reporters that it was only when Boris Johnson refused to back him in the debate last night that he decided to take the decision and resign today.
No, I understand that Sir Kim had been considering his position once the material was published on Sunday. As I said, it became extremely difficult on the Monday when he was cut out of meetings, and then you had this direct attack from the President himself. Ambassadors around the world are expected to report fairly and frankly on what they see. That is all that Kim Darroch did. He was doing his job, and the leak, of course, made it impossible for him to continue.
OK, in 2016, Boris Johnson called Donald Trump, and I quote here, out of his mind with stupefying ignorance that makes him unfit to be president.
I think that was criticism of some remarks he'd made about London, but it points to the fact that
But hang on
Boris
a minute,
Johnson...
these are words said by the man who's going to be Prime Minister of this country against the man who just tried to get our ambassador sacked.
About London, when he was mayor of London, but that points to the fact that Boris Johnson is not going to be any kind of lapdog. He's perfectly prepared to criticise the President when necessary, and indeed there are differences of view. Boris Johnson, for example, as Foreign Secretary, took a very different view of Iran and the issue of its nuclear programme from the United States. But he has a warm personal relationship with President Trump, and if, as I hope, he'll be elected, chosen as Prime Minister, then I hope he can repair some of this damage.
Isn't the truth of the matter that the special relationship will be shredded every single time by Donald Trump's mantra of America first? And this was just a foretaste of things to come.
Well, American presidents do put America first. It's the strongest economy in the world.
Including
They've got the biggest
at the expense
defense.
of the special relationship, obviously.
Sometimes at the expense of allies. You know, we have to live with that. We are, these days, a junior partner to the United States, but it is one of the closest relationships in the diplomatic world. It's a relationship founded on security, on defense, on intelligence sharing, on trade, and I'm quite sure it'll survive.
Is the sad truth not the following, that whether it's Kim Darroch or it's Ollie Robbins talking about Europe and the withdrawal agreement, the Tory party in power cannot take uncomfortable truths from civil servants who are doing their job. And when they do so, you are happy to throw them under the bus.
No, that's nonsense. We take uncomfortable truths from civil servants.
Ivan Rogers was
time.
forced to resign because he told a Tory government the uncomfortable truth about Brexit.
Ivan Rogers chose to resign over Brexit.
Rather like Sir Kim Darroch chose to resign because it was impossible for him to continue because he didn't get the support that he expected, rightly, from the government in London.
Look, he had support from the government in London. Jeremy Hunt said he hoped he would continue in office until his retirement at the end of the year. The Prime Minister, and indeed Boris Johnson,
but he didn't get support from Boris Johnson. That's the key point.
Boris
Not last night.
Boris Johnson supports all our diplomats all over the world.
But not the ones that matter in these crucial moments.
Absolutely. Look, the point Boris made was the origin of this was the leak. It was nothing to do with the debate last night. It was the leak back on Sunday and the difficulty of conducting a relationship with the United States on Monday and on Tuesday in the light of the President's tweet. That is what has led to his resignation. I regret it, but I'm sure and I hope that this relationship can be repaired.
Simon MacDonald, the head of the Foreign Office, speaking in the House of Commons today in committee, said that this was the most challenging moment that he had ever come across in his 35 years of experience. That everything, and I quote here, everything that he and his fellow civil servants have worked towards has been undermined by this. That is an astonishing thing for the head of the Foreign Office to say.
It is, and it's a very important thing for him to say, and I completely agree with him. You can't operate a diplomatic network on the scale we have if ambassadors will feel that their stuff is going to be leaked. So this is the most serious leak the Foreign Office, I think, has ever had.
So Michael Fallon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joining us now from Washington is Nicholas Burns. He was the US ambassador to NATO from 2001 to 2005. Nicholas Burns, could the British government have diffused this nonsense some other way?
In a normal American presidency, yes. Under President Trump, no. I mean, obviously, Ambassador Darroch was really done in by those in Britain who leaked his cables to a newspaper. But in another sense, he was undone by Donald Trump because Donald Trump couldn't put aside his hurt feelings and vanity, and it's understandable he didn't like what Ambassador Darroch said, but the larger US-UK relationship is much more important. And by making Ambassador Darroch persona non grata, President Trump made it impossible for the ambassador to do his job, left him no alternative but to resign. And I blame President Trump for that, because you have to put your hurt feelings aside in diplomacy and put the country first. And our relationship with the United Kingdom is really the most important relationship still that we have in the world, and that trust has been broken.
Does President Trump regard that special relationship as one with Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson, or actually with the United Kingdom?
I'm afraid that President Trump sees it in a highly political, through a political lens, and that is he does see it through Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, the Brexiteers, rather than with the entire country of the United Kingdom. And that's part of the problem. President Trump is divisive, he breaks rules, and he often does it at great cost to the United States. I can tell you, John, there is widespread dismay in Washington today over how the British ambassador was treated so poorly by our president and our government. This is unprecedented. I was searching my memory. Has anything like this happened in the American political experience over 50 or 60 years? And the answer is no. This is the kind of treatment we reserve for the Iranians or North Koreans to declare someone off limits for discussions. We don't treat the British people and the British government like this. We shouldn't. It's really a dark day for the United States government.
You let the word Brexit drop just now, and I'm just wondering whether Brexit is seen by the Trump regime as the way in which perhaps Brexiteers perceive it, which is a great dream of a wonderful special relationship, which will flower with the most unbelievable trade deals, free trade across the market.
Well, I'm afraid that President Trump tends to look backwards. He sees the 1950s as the apogee of American power. And the problem with that, of course, is that Britain has been in the EU, as you well know, for half a century. I think there's a fear in Washington among most people that Brexit's going to diminish the United Kingdom, and we don't want to see that happen. But for President Trump, who is an unremitting foe of the European Union, this is a great dream. He supported Brexit. You'll remember when he was in Scotland the day after the British people voted in June 2016, Trump has been cheering on Brexit. It's very much against American interests, I think, to see Britain leave the EU, but President Trump is deciding American policy.
In some sectors of British culture, there's a great yearning to tell Mr. Trump where to get off. But Trudeau did it, and indeed, well, not to Trump, but I mean in an earlier period. Macron has done it in a more recent period. Should we tell him where to get off?
You know, I cannot root for a situation in which the United States and the United Kingdom are yelling and screaming at each other. But I will say this. It was wrong to blackball Ambassador Kim Darroch. I mean, I can imagine for President Trump to read what the ambassador said in these confidential cables. It couldn't have been easy for President Trump to read this devastating critique of his presidency. But you do have an obligation as a political leader to put the country first, and that didn't happen. And so I really hope that this can be put behind us, but it's going to take two to tango. Not only should London also find a way to work with the Trump administration has to be respectful of Britain, and to be dictating who the ambassador should be. I thought that Jeremy Hunt and Theresa May said the right thing in defending their right to appoint their ambassador.
Nicholas Burns, thanks indeed for joining us.
Doing exactly what he was told to do. So who dealt the decisive blow, President Trump or Mr. Johnson? Sir Kim's on-the-record statement said it had become impossible for him to carry on after the leak of official documents from his embassy. Privately, though, we've been told that he did watch all of the ITV debate last night, and Mr. Johnson's comments were a factor. The would-be Prime Minister's equivocations certainly didn't endear him to his critics in the party. One called his actions contemptible.
As ambassador, Sir Kim Darroch's job was to get the best access to the US president.
Hi, Mr. President. Hope it's going well.
But after his confidential professional opinion of Donald Trump was leaked, there were no more handshakes or anything else. Frozen out by a fuming president, barred from the White House on Liam Fox's recent visit, he decided today he had to resign, despite the current Prime Minister's support.
I have told him that it is a matter of great regret that he has felt it necessary to leave his position as ambassador in Washington. The whole cabinet rightly gave its full support to Sir Kim on Tuesday.
What about Boris, was the call from the backbenches. In his resignation letter, Sir Kim had written, "The current situation is making it impossible for me to carry out my role as I would like. Although my posting is not due to end until the end of this year, I believe in the current circumstances the responsible course is to allow the appointment of a new ambassador." However, ITV News understands that Sir Kim watched last night's ITV debate and this moment when Boris Johnson refused 6 times to explicitly back him.
Boris, just answer the question for once. Go on, tell us if you'll keep the ambassador in Washington. Come on.
I'm not going to be so presumptuous.
Was a factor in Sir Kim's decision. Today, Boris Johnson was insisting he hadn't sealed his fate.
I think we should be protecting brilliant civil servants from that kind of publicity.
But you weren't going to back him. You said last night you weren't going to back him.
No, on the contrary. Well, look, my view is it's wrong to drag civil servants into the political arena. That's what I think.
The Foreign Secretary has said that he's outraged by the leak and deeply saddened by the resignation. One of his backers, Sir Alan Duncan, told me the ambassador had been let down by Mr. Johnson.
Whether that was the exact trigger, I don't know, but what is clear is that Boris Johnson did fail to give him his backing, which, as a former Foreign Secretary, and as he would hope a future Prime Minister, I think is utterly contemptible.
Boris Johnson is now at least spared the decision about what to do with Sir Kim if he does become Prime Minister. The ambassador might have served the government and the country faithfully, but Donald Trump has shown who wields the power in the special relationship. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
And Robert joins us, of course, from Washington. Robert, look, this was a lifelong career civil servant forced to resign for doing exactly what he was supposed to do. What's the mood in the British contingent there tonight? And what's your own assessment of why Sir Kim really quit?
Oh, this is, Tom, a really emotional moment for British diplomats at for the British Embassy here, for British consulates right across the United States, certainly inside the ambassador's residence. There is incredible sadness, lots of tears from, I'm told, not just the junior staff, not just the kind of the support staff, but actually senior diplomats at the embassy were in tears this morning when the news broke. I think there are two parts to that. There's obviously disappointment and dismay at the way that Sir Kim's career ended in such a car crash this morning. But there's also this sort of deeper sense that the practice of diplomacy is itself now under assault. Which ambassador can send a frank and candid cable back to their home capitals? I know for a fact that many foreign ambassadors, particularly European and Asian ambassadors, have phoned Sir Kim today and say they all feel that they are under assault here. So this is a crisis not just for British diplomacy, actually for the entire Washington foreign diplomatic corps. There is anger, obviously, at the leaker for pursuing a kind of personal or political agenda and destroying Sir Kim's career, but also at the president for this incredibly thin-skinned response. And I do understand on very good sources that that Sir Kim listened to that ITV debate, and as Romilly reported, he is certainly, as he heard it, was disappointed by Boris Johnson's lack of support. But really, the key point is he couldn't operate while being humiliated, isolated and ostracized by the Trump administration. He was being run out of town, when in fact in this place, in this town, access is absolutely everything, and he felt he simply couldn't do his job any longer.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Well, Sir Kim's resignation came just before his boss, the head of the diplomatic service, was due to appear in front of MPs to answer questions about the leaks. Sir Simon MacDonald told them they were the worst breach of trust in his career, and he is bracing himself for more. So while the hunt continues for the leaker, the search now begins for a new ambassador.
The leak of the ambassador's cables became a transatlantic row, drawing in the President, the Prime Minister and Parliament. Now the need to repair the deep diplomatic damage.
The leaker is guilty of the worst breach of trust in our service in my career.
At a hastily launched parliamentary inquiry into the leak, the head of the diplomatic service, Sir Simon MacDonald, told MPs on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee that there could be more leaks to come.
I'm just bracing myself.
So you fear that there may be more?
I fear there may be more.
On Whitehall, the hunt for the mole is on. There's a determination to restore trust. Downing Street confirming there have been initial discussions with the police.
As a police leader, we are interested in whether a crime may or may not have been committed, and that is the point at which we will get involved.
One former ambassador to the United States says the culprit should be shown no mercy.
It will be really healthy for the ability of ambassadors around the world to tell the truth to the Prime Minister if somebody were to go to jail for this. And if somebody doesn't go to jail for this, I hope nevertheless that they will be scared stiff by the inquiry, the forensic inquiry that now needs to take place.
I understand from Whitehall sources that Theresa May is considering appointing Sir Kim Darroch's replacement before she leaves Downing Street, fast-tracking the normal process and ensuring that the decision is hers and not her successor's. And a swift replacement could be possible.
Obviously, he was coming to the end of his tenure at the end of the year. I imagine some thought had been given to succession planning. So I think in terms of the replacement and what the Foreign Secretary tonight will be thinking about will be how well advanced that planning had been and whether there is the opportunity to move quickly if the full process for selecting Sir Kim's successor has been undertaken.
This afternoon, all Foreign Office staff were called to a meeting, the image conveying the sense of crisis within government.
And Angus is here now. Look, let's just be honest here. The logical conclusion of this is that an ambassador should only report what he or she thinks is what the bosses back home and the head of the host country wants to hear. Well, I mean, for the ambassador to Saudi Arabia and a million others, that's just a bit complicated. So what's the Foreign Office's reaction today? What's the mood? How are they going to pick a new ambassador?
Well, I've been talking to a number of experienced civil servants throughout the day. I think it has been an extraordinary day. There is a sense this is a moment, because British diplomats are used to being under pressure around the world in more unfriendly countries, hostile states sometimes. I was in China, in Beijing, when there was a ministerial freeze for 18 months, a very frosty atmosphere. But to be under pressure from an ally, an envoy of the monarch, to be under pressure from an ally. Sir Simon MacDonald said that hadn't happened since the 19th century. So there is this sense that something really significant has happened today. Real fears within the civil service and the diplomatic service that somehow the diplomats, Sir Kim, with this leak, has been drawn into a much bigger political game. And that's why Theresa May, partly the feeling is why Theresa May will be wanting to replace Sir Kim very quickly, not just to repair the damage that has been done, but also to try to end any deeper, darker political game or manoeuvring that's going on behind the scenes.
OK, as you say, an extraordinary day. Thank you very much indeed, Angus.